Morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I'm Yuval, and this is another live stream in the series deconstructing the issues with OKRs and some ideas of what to do about them. And today we'll be focusing on activity output OKRs. What's the issue? Why is it an anti-pattern to see too many of those? Why is it happening that in many organizations we're seeing this happen? And what to actually start to do about it. As usual, if you have questions or comments as you're following along, please post them on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Today I'm also um, live streaming to Facebook in parallel. So bring it on with the comments. That's what makes it more interesting. So in the previous live stream, I looked at the issue with having too many OKRs and the problems with that, and how to actually focus yourselves on a smaller set of OKRs that are the really meaningful stuff you want to focus on. But there still might be an issue if those OKRs are mainly activity based. So let's start with defining what do we mean by activity, output, and outcome. The definition is pretty simple. Activity is things that people do. Output is what the organization or these people produce. Outcome is things that are hopefully desirable, that our customers or our users of the product or the service that we're working on actually experience. And there's even another level, which is the impact of that outcome. So through this outcome, are we achieve what's the impact that we're seeing? And our goals, and specifically objectives and key results, are types of goals, can focus on any one of these levels. So if we have, for example, a goal that's focused on activity, what this is telling people is we want to see you do something. If we have a goal that's focused on output, that goal basically talks about we want to see you build something, achieve something. And if it's an outcome, we want you to do whatever it takes in order to achieve some outcome that we want to see. Now, it probably already makes a lot of sense to you that we want to focus on outcomes. For example, if our goals are focused on activity, it doesn't really guarantee that we'll achieve the outcome. But a lot of time we do see activity-based goals. Why is that? First of all, that's the traditional way we've broken work down. We take, at some point there might be somebody thinking about a goal, but very quickly, especially if we have to deconstruct that goal and spread achieving it to a lot of people, the pieces that are broken out to the different people become pieces that are outputs and maybe even activities, because we struggle to break the big outcome into smaller outcomes. And we automatically find it easier to break a big outcome into smaller tasks. That's the way we've always done things. And those smaller tasks have a benefit, which is that they provide us the ability to see checkpoints and milestones. We can feel like there's progress. We can feel like there's busy work. At its worst, we are even seeing situations where we struggle to even slice work into meaningful output, and we find ourselves actually just focusing on activity, seeing that people are actually busy, are utilized, are being efficient in how they use their day. You've probably seen situations where people are very busy, but they're not very effective. They're not really delivering stuff, or even if they're delivering stuff, that stuff can sit on the shelf and not be used. So we want to switch towards more and more of an outcome-based orientation. Let's take a look at a couple of other models that talk about this challenge. The first model is the model of complexity and empiricism, and that model kind of underlies all of the other models that I'm talking about here. We need to make a distinction between different types of goals, different types of objectives, generally different types of work. Work that is simple, that is well understood, where we could actually forecast, anticipate what would be the effect of a certain activity or doing the work a certain way, is work where it's not a big deal if we actually use output-based goals. Because there's less uncertainty, we don't really need to steer. But if we look at more and more of the work that we're doing in organizations, and especially if we remember that OKRs are not the day-to-day work, OKRs are the big rocks. OKRs are the areas of the organization where we're trying to disrupt ourselves, to develop or grow how we're doing business, how grow our product. If we keep that in mind, that sort of work is typically pretty complex. We haven't done that. It's developing new ways of working or new products. So there's a lot of uncertainty both around how to achieve the goal as well as what the goal even is. And in that environment, which we call the complex environment, we know that empiricism works better. We know that we need to make some assumptions about what's valuable and how to actually achieve it, do something based on that hypothesis, and be able to inspect and adapt based on the transparency of, is it actually working? Is it actually useful or not? So if we agree that this is the environment that we're in, we can kind of see how in this environment where, if we use Henrik's great visual from the Spotify engineering culture video, if you look at the different environments that we might find ourselves in an environment which is simple, it might be okay to use multiple techniques here. But in an environment that is complex, where crossing the river in some situations could be a complex problem, the right answer ideally is to give the people that are actually working on this problem some leeway to figure out a way to cross the river. The first important thing is they need to be aware of what are we trying to achieve. That's what alignment is about. That's understanding the outcome, but also not over specifying the means towards that end, giving flexibility to the teams around how to actually achieve the goal. An output or activity focused goal would be that we're telling people to build a bridge. And actually in that situation, we might not be telling them that the bridge is needed to cross the river. You can say, of course, we're building a bridge in order to cross the river. In this situation, which is relatively simple, it's kind of obvious what's the outcome. But there are many situations in the real world where we tell people what to build, but it's not clear why, or there are it's implicit, why are we doing this thing? And nobody's really willing to have the conversation around why are we doing this? One reason why people are afraid to have that conversation is that it forces accountability around that why. It forces people to actually step up to the plate and say, this is my belief around what's happening here. And if we solve this issue, if we provide the output that is needed, I'm pretty sure that this will help us achieve the outcome, and this would have this sort of impact. By not talking too much about the outcomes, people can stay away from that accountability. They can say, okay, yeah, we've built a bridge, but I'm not really accountable to whether we've achieved the outcome or not. Another interesting model in this space that fewer people are familiar with, and that's a shame, is Stephen Bungai's model for gaps between plans, actions, and results. This is a model that is discussed in depth in his book, The Art of Action, and you can also look for some keynotes online. I'll drop in a link to one of the videos after the live stream if you're interested. But generally, what Stephen talks about is the fact that in situations of fog of war, in his book, he actually talks about the Prussian army and how they approached the battlefield and decision making and command and control on the battlefield. The fog of war basically talks about three gaps. There are gaps. The first gap is the knowledge gap, the difference between what we would like to know and what we actually know. There's the alignment gap, which is the difference between what we want people to do and what they actually go and do. So sometimes when we want people to do something, we even tell them to do something, they don't necessarily do exactly that. And there's a final gap. Let's say we knew everything and people actually did what we told them to do. There might be an effects gap, which is the difference between what we expect our actions or people's actions to achieve and what they actually achieve. If you combine these three gaps, you can see that it's pretty hard to anticipate, actually achieving an effect. Especially if our approach towards that is to have one central figure that is trying to be a know-it-all, almost godlike figure, whether it's in the battlefield or in the organization, which is telling everybody what to do. If we tell people exactly what to do, then we will be prone to these gaps. We will be prone to the fact that we might not know everything because we're that central figure. We can't be in all of the trenches that our people are in. We can't have all of the context in the world. Even if we are pretty clear in the activities or the outputs that we want our people to focus on, there might be the alignment gap. Our people might do something different. And the final gap is, let's say they even do what we tell them to do, there might be an effects gap. The last problem with this model is that it's slow. So if we need to wait for somebody to actually tell people everything, and every decision goes to a central location, when we're trying to move fast and react to what's going on, we will be very slow. Our decisions would actually, or waiting for decisions would actually slow us down, would be an impediment for our ability to innovate and our time to market. So what's the alternative that Bungai suggests? Kind of aligned with what we're talking about. He basically talks about focusing on the outcomes. Or as the Spice Girls used to say, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Tell me the outcome that you want me to achieve, and give me the space to actually try and achieve that outcome, and the ability to actually try to learn whether my actions are heading towards that outcome or not, are having the effects we want to see or not, and adjust course as needed. Which is another way to basically say empiricism. Let's use empiricism. Another body of work, somewhat closer to our world, is evidence-based management. More or less talks about the same thing. Evidence-based management talks about the fact that we want to have a strategic goal that talks about the outcome that we want to see, maybe even the impact that we want to see. We understand, and you can see that through the fact that this goal can kind of move around over here. We understand that this goal is an hypothesis in and of itself. It's based on some knowledge we think we have about what's going on, and maybe that knowledge is incomplete. So we might need to inspect and adapt even the goal. Towards that goal, we set intermediate goals, and towards achieving an intermediate goal that's a bit more midterm, we set immediate tactical goals, and we try to achieve those by making, an hypothesis, taking some action, experimenting, measuring the impact, inspecting that, and adapting, which is what we call the experiment loop. And as part of that experiment loop, we constantly, make sure that we set tactical goals appropriate to what we know at the time, to try to seek towards the intermediate goal, to try to seek towards the strategic goal, and constantly inspecting and adapting both our actions towards and our experimentation towards those goals, as well as the goals themselves. This is what we define as evidence-based management. And all of these models, in a sense, are there to provide the rationale for people for why are we focusing on outcomes. Now, with that in mind, the question that you're probably asking is, okay, convince me, I want to focus on outcomes. How do I do that? And the answer is to start with why. If you are looking at, so the first thing I suggest doing is actually categorizing your goals, looking at your OKRs or whatever other systems of goals that you have. And after you focused the list of goals on a smaller list, you threw out the KPIs and ongoing work. When you're focusing on really what's strategic that you're focused on, categorize that into activities, output, and outcome. I wouldn't be surprised if the picture looks more or less like what we're seeing over here, with a lot of activity goals and fewer output and outcome goals. And then what you can start to do is ask yourselves why. Look, for example, at the output goals and ask, okay, why is that output useful? What's the assumption? What's the hypothesis around why this output would be useful? And if you ask why, or so what, why is it so important? Several times you might actually get to what's the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And that might be a better objective to focus on. And the other question to then ask is, okay, how will we know that we're actually achieving this outcome? And this is where it comes to the measure, the key result. The key result for an objective should be the indicator for us that we're actually achieving the outcome. Not that we've done the work, not that something has been delivered, but are we achieving the outcomes that we had in mind? So, for example, if we see an objective that is, we want to improve the onboarding wizard or script for our product. Is that an activity? Improving is an activity, but if we structure that objective as having a streamlined installation wizard for our product, that's more of an output, which is better. If we ask ourselves, why are we doing that? The reason might be that we've noticed a lot of people are giving up on actually starting to use activating and starting to use our product, which we've realized is one of our constraints in scaling, in growth, in our flywheel of getting more and more people that are using our product, starting to actually use our product. And the outcome, if we want to phrase this as an outcome-based goal, that's exactly what it will be about. The outcome goal would be around activating more of the people, getting to the point that more people are activated and fewer people churn or drop off during the onboarding process. Another reason might be that we're currently spending too much time or energy or money on onboarding people, and we want to make that an automated process so that we can scale faster. So that's an example of moving an objective towards the right here, shifting an objective towards outcomes, which is the process that you should start to look at. All right, I see we have a question from the audience. Carlos is asking, could you recommend us some books related to how to create strategic goals, intermediate goal, and tactical goals, please? Good question. So a couple of books that I like in this space. So one book is the recent EBM book, Unlocking Business Agility with Evidence-Based Management, by my friends and colleagues at scrum.org, Todd Miller, Ryan Ripley, Kurt, and Trish. That book goes much deeper into how to actually implement evidence-based management, both at the product level, portfolio level, and organizational change level. So you'll find a lot of examples there. Another book that I like these days, let's see if I have the link here, is Evidence Guided, which is a new book by Tamar Gilad that talks about his model as a product coach and product executive for moving towards more of an evidence-guided product process. So a lot of good examples there. Radical Focus by Christina Woodke is one of my recommended OKR resources that also has some good examples for outcome-oriented goals. And of course, the PolyBM class or the Modern Leadership with OKRs that is based on EBM as well is another resource for how to actually create such effective goals. The other resource that I actually recommend, this is not necessarily all about Agile, but if we look at the Agile world, there's a lot of experience in the Agile world around how to actually do this, into how to actually elevate from tasks to experiences to outcomes. And that's actually what is creating such an interesting connection between the world of Agile and agility and the world of OKRs. We're seeing more and more Agile practitioners that are finding themselves in a situation where they need to coexist with OKRs in their organization. And I'll actually talk about this some more in a future episode. But one of the things that they actually bring to the table is so many years of trying to figure out, okay, how do we slice that elephant? How do we do elephant carpaccio? How do we break a big feature into smaller stories? And techniques, for example, such as story mapping or impact mapping, are techniques that can actually help us look at an activity or an output and structure the conversation around why are we actually looking at this, and how do we actually connect that feature or story to our eventual goal. Now, I would say that beyond all of these techniques, there's something cultural about why are we avoiding strategic goals. There's something about much more than the technique for creating the right level of goals. It's more around the interactions between people and levels in the organization. Are we actually expecting people to come up with strategic goals, or are we expecting them to build widgets? Are we setting up teams in a way where it's easier for these teams to focus on tasks rather than to focus on strategic goals? For me, that's typically the biggest challenge, not necessarily are we using the right techniques. If you want individuals and interactions over process and tools, are we setting up the individuals in the right sort of structure where they can focus on something strategic? Or are we setting up teams that are organized around functional lines or silos, where by default they're destined to actually focus on at best outputs and at worst activities? If, for example, we have a testing team, the team is destined to naturally focus on the activity of testing, not on achieving output, building features, or achieving outcomes. The more we focus on the organizing around value, where we actually have teams that are focused on outcomes or on delivering value, it's much easier for these people, for these teams, and those that are leading them to actually talk in strategic goals, to even talk about intermediate goals that are based on outcomes. So I hope this makes sense. I do plan to dive deeper into how to organize effectively around OKRs and some of the anti-patterns of organizing around functions when trying to leverage OKRs. Consider my answer here, just now, a preview for that session. So to sum up, today I focused on the challenges with using activity and output OKRs, or goals in general. Why do we want to focus on outcome-oriented goals? Why is it so hard to focus on outcome-oriented goals? And some techniques that you might look at to start that journey. So another final question from Carlos. This is a great question. When do we have to combine or use OKR and EBM? Is it not enough to use EBM, evidence-based management? If it's possible to know where we can get case studies solved or for solving about OKR and EBM? So this relates to market dynamics. So if we go back to one of the first sessions here, OKRs have won the, let's call it, the evidence-based management or the alignment framework wars, in a sense. Similar to the Agile space, where Scrum, is the agile framework of choice, and you might ask questions, can we use something else? Of course you can use extreme programming, of course you can use other agile techniques, but most people are familiar with Scrum. If you look at the scaling world, most people use SAFe. If you look at the alignment world, although there are multiple techniques in this space, whether it's 4 disciplines of execution, Lancioni's silos, politics, and turf wars, entrepreneurial operating systems, scaling up, or the Gazelle Rockefeller habits approach. All of these approaches are valid ways to drive alignment and focus. And Bungai, his work that I mentioned today, is another basically another way to do this. Most organizations use OKRs. So one thing that can definitely be useful is to say, okay, these organizations that are already using OKRs, they could benefit by learning about EBM and using EBM in order to make their OKRs more effective. Another approach is to just use EBM. If you haven't done anything yet, just use EBM or any of the other techniques that I mentioned. Even when you do that, EBM doesn't really tell you how to form your goals. Your strategic goal, your intermediate goal, it doesn't really dive into the detail of how to actually structure that goal. So you could definitely use OKRs as the OKR format as a way to structure your goal, like you might use the user story format of as the I want so that, as a way to frame your backlog items. It's an option, not a must, but it's a useful way to look at things, to basically say, I do have a qualitative objective, and I'm pretty clear about how am I going to actually measure whether I'm achieving that objective using the key results. And that's actually something crucial for EBM. Each goal should be accompanied by measurement of are we tracking towards this goal? Are the results that we're seeing, is the evidence that we're seeing actually aligned with the outcome that we want to see? So the OKR format can be useful even if we're not currently using OKRs in the organization, but we can use another approach as well. So I hope that answers. I might do a specific session just about the relationship with OKRs and EBM as well. That's as you might imagine, that's an interesting conversation in the EBM world as well. We're having interesting conversations around that in the professional Scrum world. So hope this was useful. My next session on Wednesday, 2 days from now, will be focused on scaling OKRs. So we'll talk about cascading and what to be careful of when cascading OKRs, what are some anti-patterns, what are some best practices. There's an interesting suggestion by Ben Lamorte around how to actually solve some of these challenges, and I might even connect the world of scaling OKRs to some of the things that we've learned in other scaling frameworks. So I hope to see you then. Thank you, Carlos, for your questions. We'll continue the conversation in the LinkedIn and YouTube comments. Bye, everybody. Have a great week.